Ladies and gentlemen, could not be more excited to welcome Danny Meyer to Authors at Wharton. Danny, welcome.
Adam, all of you guys, hi, how are you? Bring it, come on, here we go. It's great to be here.
So glad you're here. We're trying to convince you to make the New York-Philly trip a daily commute. Are you in?
You could easily be in. I got here in less time than it would take to go, to Kennedy Airport, basically. So this is a lot more fun.
Well, be careful what you wish for. So I'd love to start at the beginning. You have a lot of big fans in the room. Tell us how you fell in love with food.
I think I fell in love with food because I was not supposed to eat it. Doesn't that sound weird? So, yeah, it does sound weird. So, first of all, food is love. There's no question about that. I was a middle child of three, growing up in St. Louis, 1960s and 70s, and my mom remains a Democrat. My dad was a Republican. Every night there was a discussion at the dinner table about Watergate, Nixon, all the kind of stuff that we think is so new today. It was all happening back then. And food was the thing at the table as the middle child of three that I found was the one thing that could bring us together. I was the peacemaker of the family. I was the one that wanted everybody to feel good. And you couldn't sustain the argument when you had a really good piece of fried chicken in your mouth. You just couldn't. And I liked it so much that by the time I was probably in sixth grade or so, my mom was taking me to the Husky section to shop. And at that point, she decided that I should cut back on my food, which only made me want food even more. And I started finding recipes all over the place. I would actually wake up, I've never said this publicly, I'd wake up at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning knowing that no one else would be up till 9, and I would cook food in the kitchen, presuming that no one could smell it. But, and I learned how to go into the refrigerator and unpack all the lunch meats and everything and put the pack back as if no one had broken. One more thing, since I'm on True Confessions right now, Adam. Our neighbors right up the hill from my house when I was probably in second, third grade were allowed to do two things I was not allowed to do. They had great afternoon snacks, fried salami, and they got to watch TV. So I would go to my neighbor's house, have a complete dinner while watching The Three Stooges and Gilligan's Island and all that kind of stuff. And then I'd come home and eat a whole dinner after that. So go figure. You asked the question.
All right, so I get the love of food, but how did you go from that to saying, I want to be a restaurateur and an entrepreneur?
Well, a lot of steps in between that. So I was a poli-sci major. Interestingly, based on the story I told you, I really got very, very interested in what we used to call current events. And even though my dad and I were just incredibly close, there's something about skewing a little bit to the left, hanging out with my mom that I really liked. And so I was going to either, after being a poli-sci major, I was going to go to law school or I was going to be a journalism major. And I didn't want to do that right after college, so I took a job as a salesman selling electronic tags to stop shoplifters. As a matter of fact, my company was probably 20 minutes from Philadelphia in a little town called Thoroughfare, New Jersey. So I'd come down here all the time, and I just loved Philadelphia. But I bring it up because I did it, and I did it really well. I was a top salesman for about 4 or 5 years, and I put away all this money and invested it in the stock of that company, which was then called Over the Counter. Now it's NASDAQ. And the stock was selling at $1.50, and it went up to 13 by the time I was done. And I had this money, and I said, all right, you better get your life together because you don't want to stop shoplifters the rest of your life. And so what I did was to pick and choose between law or journalism, and I picked law. So much so that I took the LSAT after taking the Stanley Kaplan course. And the night before I took the LSAT, I was out for dinner with my aunt and uncle and grandmother at an Italian restaurant in New York. And the guy who likes to eat wasn't allowed to eat or drink too much because I had to wake up at 5 the next morning. And my uncle turns to me and he says, "What the hell is eating you anyway?" And I said, well, I have to take the LSAT tomorrow morning. And he said, well, of course you do. You want to be a lawyer? And I said, actually, I don't. And he got so mad at me. And he asked me the best question, probably until tonight, the best question I've ever been asked my whole life. And he said, do you have any idea how long you're going to be dead? And I said, no, I hadn't really thought about that. Why? And he said, I don't know either, but a hell of a lot longer than you're going to be alive. Why in the world would you do something you have no passion around? And I said, well, I don't know what else I could do. And he looked at me and he said, you got to be kidding me. All I've ever heard you talk about your entire life is restaurants and food. So I took the LSAT the next morning, never applied to a law school.
Wait, you still took it?
Well,
why?
I had paid the money.
I'm just going to suffer more just for fun.
No, but
yes.
but so I hooked up with a pal of mine from school, and I said, I want to open a restaurant. Let's take a restaurant management class. You be the money guy, I'll be the food guy. And he said, cool. And he took 2 of the classes with me, and unfortunately told his parents, and they said, no son of ours is going into that nasty business. So he left me in the lurch. But he was willing to introduce me to the one restaurant client that his bank training program had, because banks used to completely run the other direction if you said you were in the restaurant business. And I got a job at this restaurant. It was a great interview. The owner said, walk down the bar. He sits there watching me. Stop. He looks me up and down. You'll do. That was my interview. And that's what got me into the restaurant industry. I had to do it.
I am so glad you didn't go to law school.
I'll tell you what, I would have been the world's absolute worst lawyer.
So you then start working in a restaurant, presumably, and then when did you decide to strike out on your own?
So I had, as I had said earlier, I'd put away some money, which was great because I had no one to support but myself, and I was making a lot of commissions, and it multiplied with that stock. And so I did this job as the assistant lunch manager. And back then what that meant was you hung out with the chef in the morning, understood what the special was going to be for the day, typed it on a typewriter, ran down the street to a copy shop. Imagine that, guys. Paying 5 cents a copy for their Xerox machine. Came back, stuffed them in, looked at the reservation sheet, which of course was all pencil and paper back then, decided who I was going to sit where in the dining room. It was a pretty cool thing for whatever I was, 24, 25 years old. And I got to I knew that I was either going to fall in love with this business or get it out of my system and never think about it again. And I fell in love with it. And also I was really lucky because on my first day of work, as I'm running down to the reservation office, because they trusted me with reservations, this beautiful woman was running up the stairs with a big tray of butter, and we kind of locked eyes for a second. I said, I think I'm going to like this job. She was gone the next day. But she came back 4 months later, and now 35 years later, she's my wife. Wow. So I got a lot out of that job.
I have a lot of questions now.
We didn't have our first date till my last night of work, if that's where you're going.
I was actually thinking about something different, which is the question of if she had stayed, would you have fallen in love?
Wow, I've never been asked that question. She was and is an actress, and she had just been cast in something in Indiana, Guys and Dolls. And I thought about her a lot. I don't know, because would I have thought about her as much? All I know is that the heart does grow fonder when you've had like a 6-second opportunity to meet someone and you say, that's it. And I'll never forget, I was the guy answering the phone when she called to say, I wonder if I could speak with the owner to get back on the schedule. Yes, right away. You know?
All right, so then what happens? When does Shake Shack take shape in your mind?
You're skipping an entire career, but that's fine.
I am. I mean, you can tell us about that career too.
That's fine, because I love being known as a hamburger guy when, all we did before that was like 3-star restaurants and stuff, but that's okay.
We can talk about Union Square too. I'm up for that. But just out of curiosity, how many people want to hear about Shake Shack first?
How many want to hear about it next?
Oh, come on. Wait, I'm supposed to have home court advantage here, Danny. Who invited you?
Well, you invited me to make this my home, so...
All right, okay, fine. Tell us about fine dining.
All right, so fine dining. So...
Damn it.
So at this point, I had gotten the courage finally to tell my parents that I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I was going to go into the restaurant business. But believe it or not, if you go all the way back, this was at this point 1984, and it was not considered a cool entrepreneurial, or really a valid entrepreneurial pursuit to go into the restaurant business. That was for other people, which is bizarre and unfair. But what had started to happen at that point in this country was you started to see these really well-educated people becoming chefs. I can remember them: Jeremiah Tower, Joyce Goldstein, Alice Waters. I could go on and on with all these people, and they were taking master's degrees from Ivy League universities and deciding they were going to be chefs. And so I told my parents, I'm going to be a chef, because I knew I could get away with that. And so my dad said, all right, great, you're going to Italy and France to learn to cook. And he connected me with a bunch of places. Spent my whole time dreaming up what would be my favorite restaurant if only it existed. And I kept this incredible journal that I still have, drawing pictures of things I liked, like the color of the wainscoting or the kind of lamp that was above the bar. Obviously, we didn't have the internet, so if I liked a dish, I tried to guess what the recipe was for the dish, wrote them all down. And I even came up with the name for this restaurant that I would one day open. The first one was Blue Plate Special. Really glad I didn't do that. Next one, because I spent some time in northern Italy, I was going to call the restaurant Gorgonzola. Really glad I didn't do that. I hate Gorgon. What did I think I was doing? That became Union Square Cafe, and I did come back from Italy and France, and I just wanted to find a place near a farmer's market, because that's all the cooking I was doing in Bordeaux, and in Milan, and Bologna, and Rome. And in those countries, unlike America, where we were so self-conscious about ingredients and naming the farm and bragging about who grew our lettuce, that's just how you do it, or who milked the cow that made the cheese. That's just how you do it in France and Italy. So that was a big part of the reason that this place I found, which was right next to Union Square's Green Market, which is a great green market, that became Union Square Cafe. And the only other thing I'll tell you about that is that I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I really didn't. And on night one, it was a disaster. I'll tell you one quick story that I don't like to tell publicly. I don't know if I ever have, but I think I'm beyond getting in trouble for this all these years later. We got a 2-star review from some newsletter, restaurant newsletter. Again, no internet. And it was the first night at Union Square Cafe that we had ever had enough business to seat anyone in our second dining room, the back dining room. That dining room, you would sit underneath this beautiful mural. We still have pieces of that mural in our new Union Square Cafe. So I had a friend who had just come back from studying in Africa, and I took him to the balcony overlooking that mural. It was the first night we had ever had any guests in that dining room. We were that busy. Never mind, none on the balcony and only like 3 tables down there. Well, as I'm showing him the mural, I'm literally going like this. I want you all to look at this fixture hanging from the ceiling. That entire fixture broke out of the ceiling like a guillotine, smashed. It was the light track, smashed into the wall 3 inches away from the face of the woman who was sitting on the banquette, 3 inches away, and made a big gash in the wall. Those 3 inches are the reason that I am here right now and not in prison somewhere. Seriously, the restaurant at that point was probably 4 weeks old. The contractor obviously had a lot of splaining to do on Monday morning. I was so inexperienced that I went up to the woman who's like this, and I said, "Would you care to have a different table?" And her husband said, "No, we are out of here." And I was too stupid and inexperienced to even ask for their name. So part of my hope is that someone heard this story because their aunt, survived Union Square Cafe in 19... But So we went through the whole thing and, learned how to run the restaurant. And we, this is really when I was learning about hospitality and learning that you could overcome a whole lot of mistakes, technical mistakes, making people wait too long, undercooking something, oversalting something, spilling. I spilled all over people all the time. But you could overcome those mistakes if your intent was that they would leave happier. And I just learned so many of the lessons that to this day inform so much of what we do, that it's so much more important for people that you made them feel good, even than how good the food tastes. And so then you really have magic if you can do both of those things. And ultimately, we figured out how to make good food and not make you wait 30 minutes for your second course.
Well, it's easy to see in that story the enlightened hospitality vision taking shape. Talk to us a little bit about how you started implementing that, because I'm sure you ran into your share of people who said, "This is a terrible idea. Like, what do you mean you're going to hire servers on empathy?"
Well, so in the early days of Union Square Cafe, I actually loved the application process. I wrote the application. I had stupid questions in there, but they gave me what's your favorite mayonnaise? Okay, if it was Hellman's, you were hired. We started to get some people saying, I don't eat mayonnaise, I only make my own aioli. And I was like, go somewhere else. Or I would ask, how have you used your sense of humor as a way to make people feel better? And, some of the weird questions I was asking, you'd get people looking at you like you were from Mars. But every now and then you'd find someone where in those days, that's the only thing I did. So I was like 16 hours at the same place every day. I wanted to like the people I was. By the way, guys, check this out. As I'm walking here from Shake Shack, I walked across your diagonal and a woman stops me and I go, I know you. She said, I was a waitress at Union Square Cafe in 2005. And she's a registrar here at Penn right now. So there's a reason that happened. I don't know what it is yet, but gave me that story anyway. But in those days, I was saying, I wanted to hire people that I wanted to spend time with. And I wanted to hire people that I thought our guests would want to spend time with. And immediately, it was disarming to a lot of people because in this country, there's sort of a servant servitude thing that probably started with the whole tipping mentality many, many years ago. And we weren't doing that. We were like, we got a bunch of really smart people who at this point in their lives want to earn a living by making you feel better. So if you want to play that game, we're in it. We're in it for you. And it was all about education, wine education. It was such an exciting time in our industry. The food revolution, the wine revolution. And Union Square Cafe had that market all to itself for many years. It was the only restaurant I had for the first 10 years of my career. So enlightened hospitality happened because I betrayed my own promise to myself, which was having seen my dad go through 2 bankruptcies, one at the age of 12 and the other, I think I was probably 19. And, that's a tough thing when your hero, great entrepreneurial ideas, but he either expanded too quickly or he didn't surround himself with enough talented people. And I learned a lot of lessons from that. But for that reason, I delayed expanding because I assumed expansion equals bankruptcy. And it wasn't until he died an early, he was only 59. He had cancer. But when he died, I got a lot of therapy. And the first thing I learned was I'm not my dad. And that, number 2, there's a whole lot of businesses that have wisely expanded without going bankrupt. And so I finally allowed myself to open a second restaurant, but only if I could satisfy 3 criteria. And I knew they were impossible. I was using this as a shield so that I would never go the way of my dad. I said, I'll only open a second restaurant if I believe that one day it can be thought to be as excellent as in its category as the first. And I thought I was an imposter anyway, so Union Square Cafe being a fluke, there's no way I could do that kind of thing again. Number 2, I'll only open it if, in the process of opening a second restaurant, Union Square Cafe actually gets better. Now, we didn't see a whole lot of restaurant full service fine dining restaurant groups back then. And the third was, I'll only open a second restaurant if in the process of doing so, I can actually improve my quality and balance of life. So by having 3 insurmountable criteria, I knew I'd never have to do it. Well, this guy came knocking on my door, a guy named Tom Colicchio. You may know him as Top Chef. Back then, he had a full head of hair. He was skinny. And he truly was an incredibly gifted chef when he was cooking in the kitchen. And he said, Union Square Cafe is my favorite restaurant. My restaurant's about to go out of business. It was called Mondrian. This was 1992, after the recession, after the Gulf War. And I want to do one with you. And I said, that's like Julius Erving saying, can I please play on your team? I'm trying to come up with a Philadelphia. Did I do okay on that? Not really.
I mean, you could go Joel Embiid would probably be safer for this age group, but yeah.
By the way, the only good thing about the Eagles not winning is that we get to be here tonight, because this was going to be called off, is what I heard.
This would have been parade time.
Yeah. Well,
so thank you for trying to make us feel better about the Super Bowl.
I was rooting for the Eagles, not so I wouldn't have to be here tonight, but I like the story. I mean, what a great team. But anyway, so I did this restaurant with Tom, Gramercy Tavern, and it was a disaster after the very first day we opened. Oh my God. Actually, 6 months before we opened, this writer said, I want to follow you to do a piece for the New Yorker about the process of how you open a restaurant. And Tina Brown, who was the editor of the New Yorker at the time, green lighted it, lit it, paid for him to go all over the places in Italy that had inspired us, and France that had inspired us. And about 2 weeks before the restaurant opened, I get a call from him, the author, and he said, I've got good news and bad news. What do you want first? Well, how do you answer? That's such a stupid question. I don't know. Whatever you want, give it to me. He said, well, the bad news is that Tina has killed the story. Now, this guy's been embedded with us. He's gone with our architect, all the places we sent them, for months. He's been in every single meeting. And he said, but the good news is that Kurt Anderson, who was now the editor-in-chief of New York Magazine, he said, but Kurt just picked it up, and he's going to make it a cover story. So I go, okay. And there's a big difference, guys, because the New Yorker back then not only had no illustrations of any type, but they certainly didn't have those big punchy, hyperbolic things. If I'd gone to journalism school, I would have known that. But no, it's not about sensationalism. It's about thoughtfulness. So now we're going to be a cover story upon the opening of Gramercy Tavern. It's going to come out the day we open. Well, a week before we open, I get a call from the restaurant critic of New York Magazine, Gail Green, and she goes, hey, I heard you're about to open a restaurant, and I was thinking about maybe putting in a little paragraph in the back of the magazine to announce it. And I'm going like, shit, this is the restaurant critic. She obviously doesn't know about this cover story. Do I tell her, in which case I'm screwed, or do I not tell her, in which case I'm screwed? So I told her. I had the stupid little integrity bird on my shoulder. And she said, what? And she starts cursing out her editor, hangs up the telephone. The day the restaurant opens, the cover story comes out, and the cover is a big white blank page except for 4 gold stars, and then a pack of our matches, Gramercy Tavern, and then the next great restaurant for New York from Danny Meyer, which he may as well have just made a bullseye on my back, because what happened, not only was Gail Green incredibly angry, every review we got destroyed the restaurant, just destroyed it. And one of those pages was a picture of Tom sitting, I don't even think he had his shoes on, sitting on the wood-burning fireplace, saying, and the quote out of context, we're going to go up against Boulé. Well, Boulé was the most popular restaurant in New York City. Like, that's just not how you run for office. You just don't do that. So it was a good year before we got our footing, but I promise I'm going to answer your question. About 3 months into it, the restaurant was busy. It's just that people were taking pot shots at us, and I wasn't used to that. At this point, Union Square Cafe had become New York's second or third favorite restaurant in the Zagat survey. And I wanted everyone to love both of the restaurants equally. Well, one day a woman comes up to me after lunch at Gramercy Tavern, and I didn't know how to manage two businesses. I was just running back and forth, and at this point I had not learned, as we taught our kids, how to use your words. My style of management for all those years at Union Square Cafe is, if Danny's doing it, that's how you should do it. That's how he wants you to do it. But I never used language, which is obviously the way you teach. And so with two restaurants, wherever I wasn't at the other. And I would go here to fix the problem. And meanwhile, the problem I had fixed here just got worse. And I tried to work half days at one and the second half of the day at the other. That didn't work. I eat lunch and dinner. Then I tried to work 2.5 days at one and 2.5 days at the other, and that didn't work. So this woman comes up to me after her lunch. She was a Union Square Cafe regular. She said, "I tried your new restaurant." And I said, she just got up from the table, and I could see she was not happy. And I said, And she goes, "You're never going to make it here." "What do you mean?" "Well, where do you want me to start?" She said, "I just entertained 6 people for lunch. What happened here never would have happened at Union Square Cafe." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "First of all, you at Union Square Cafe, you know I like my salmon rare. It came well done today." I said to myself, okay, I can go with that kind of a mistake so far. And she said, "The problem was your server took the order rare. Your server at Union Square Cafe would have seen not only that it didn't arrive rare, but that I was the only one at the table not eating. And when I did take a bite, just to make my guests feel comfortable, it was obviously well done. And what did your server do? Your server let it stay there for the whole meal. At Union Square Cafe, they would have removed it discreetly, offered to get me a new one. They would have brought me a cup of soup or something so everybody else could eat and not wait for me. Here, you know what happened? At the end of the meal, your manager, that guy who was the general manager, who foolishly I had turned into a partner on day one, giving him equity in the business, that manager took my salmon, just gave me a coat check so I could get my salmon back in a bag from your coat checker afterwards, left it on the bill. At Union Square Cafe, not only would they have taken it off the bill, but whatever they served instead wouldn't have been charged. I am offended. I got so mad. To this day, I can't tell that story without getting mad. And I called an all-staff meeting for the following Saturday. And I spent the next 2 nights just stewing and thinking about what was it that was not intuitive to these people that everyone at Union Square Cafe would have known how to do. And that was when I coined the phrase enlightened hospitality. And I had an all-staff meeting, and I said, "Guys, from now on," and by the way, the manager, when I said, "Why in the world would you leave it on the check?" And he said, "She took a bite out of it. I'm not going to let her get away with not paying." Oh my God, can you believe that? So, and I laid down exactly what I thought we had to do. And I said, we have the exact same 5 stakeholders as every business on earth. Every business. Even universities have these 5 stakeholders. And we don't get to pick who the stakeholders are, but we get to determine the order in which we are going to prioritize them. And I said, guys, when we win, when someone leaves here raving, or someone leaves here feeling a little better than however they felt when they came in, I promise you it's because we sprinkled some hospitality on them. Well, what's hospitality? So then we had to define that. And I said, and now I'm going to tell you who gets the hospitality and in which order. The thing I expect is to create a virtuous cycle here where one good thing leads to something even better. From this day forward, you're going to put your customers second. And everyone looked at me like I was an idiot because they knew how mad I was about what happened with our guests that night. And I said, and the reason is that if we're going to create a virtuous cycle, then the input has to be us. And the first job you have is to take care of each other, is to do thoughtful things for each other so that it feels even better for even better people to want to come work in this place. And I believe that if you do that, the odds are going to go up dramatically that that troop of people are going to do extraordinary things for our guests. It's not because I want to put our guests second. It's because, in fact, I want even more guest satisfaction. And the third stakeholder is going to be the community in which we do business. We named our restaurant after the community. Okay? In fact, the first restaurant was named after its community. In fact, I kept doing that because I'm not very creative with names. Shake Shack, I got lucky on that one. But promise we'll get back to that. And then the fourth stakeholder is going to be our suppliers. So when the guy comes in here to fix the ice machine on a hot summer day, and the average restaurant is saying, when can you get it done? I want you offering that guy a glass of iced tea. That's your job to do that. And the fifth stakeholder, fifth and final, and that's not a totem pole where the fifth is on the bottom, it's a virtuous cycle, is our investor. Because if you want to have really, really happy investors, you better make sure that all those other inputs are singing. And by the way, since it's a cycle, if you break it anywhere, you break the whole thing. And what do you think is the best way to have really happy employees? When they get raises and when they get professional growth opportunities, and they only get that if you're making money. So that was the day I first laid that out. I did some things poorly that day. I did not understand how to describe it as a virtuous cycle. And the reason you just heard me say it's not a totem pole is that I'm pretty sure I wrote a chart that day in which the investor was sitting at the bottom. And there was a lot of confusion that I created where, hey, we just did a great job caring for each other. We had a great family meal here, and, you know, I'm giving Susie a back rub while she's waiting for her cappuccino. That's not it. So it has refined itself over the years, but the cool thing is that that's been the operating system for every single thing we've ever done. And then if the food is different and the decor is different and the price points are different, so be it.
So Danny, we're doing confessions tonight. I'm going to give you one of my own, which is we met about 10 years ago. I don't know if you remember this, but we were at a dinner, and a young woman came up to me and said, I just read your book, Give and Take, which had just come out, and there's somebody in this room who lives every single thing you're writing about. And I said, who? And she said, Danny Meyer. And I said, who's that? Whatever the opposite of a foodie is, that's me. I could not know less about food or restaurants.
So you didn't have to shop the Husky section like I did.
I did not. But I also, I had no clue who you were or what you stood for.
I'm honored.
I'm proud that I knew nothing. But then I found out that the young woman who was recommending your leadership was your daughter. So I was a little skeptical. But
whoa.
It's like maybe she's a little biased to think that her dad's a giver, but I'm kind of intrigued that she's this passionate about the way that you run your business, and I have to know more.
Well, now she's running an amazing ice cream place called Cafe Pana. So that's what... Is that funny?
We might have a couple fans in the room. The order I placed the other day is not coming till the end of February, which gives me a sense of just how popular it is. So congrats to Hallie.
I remember meeting you in Seattle at a Microsoft conference.
I think that was our second meeting, possibly.
And you were doing a breakout section on Give and Take, which was, I kind of wanted to go to the preach to the converted. But, you know, as I was saying earlier, language it's really the mortar between the bricks of culture. Without language, there's nothing.
I think it's so important. And so, you know, right after that, I read Setting the Table. And I was just blown away by how many similarities there were between this framework that you had built through experience and what I'd been trying to study through evidence. And I think my first shock was your 51% rule. How did that evolve? How does that work?
The 51%, and here's another cool thing that I'd say as recently as this year, I've refined that language because, so we always had a thought that the technical skills of whatever it is you're doing, in our case it's a restaurant, are 49% of the success. So all the anything that you could actually take out your phone and take a picture of falls under the category of a technical skill. How does the food look? Did they seat me on time for my reservation or not? Did the food get to the right person at the right temperature, at the right table, at the right, all that kind of stuff. But the 51% are the emotional qualities of how we made you feel while we were doing all that stuff. And I really started thinking about this a lot because I was always a big student of the Zagat survey. It's the only data that we ever got. It was annual, right? So every November, the Zagat survey would come out. They'd survey about 20,000 people with these pencil and paper. And the 20,000 people surveyed, you have to have eaten in the restaurant during that previous year. Not that anyone was checking, but that was the rule. And you could rate every restaurant 0 through 3 for food, decor, and service. And then they asked 3 other questions. What's your favorite? Name your 5 favorite restaurants in New York. I think that's all they asked. Yeah, name your 5 favorite restaurants in New York outside of that. So every year this guide would come out, and I would eat up all the data. Like, first of all, the easy one was us. Like, did we go up, down, or stay the same for food, decor, and service? And where did we go on the list of New York's favorite restaurant, New York's best food, New York's best service and decor? At this point, it was just Union Square Cafe. So the year that Gramercy Tavern opened, Union Square Cafe was New York's 2nd favorite restaurant. We had worked our way up from, like, whatever. Every year it was going up a little bit. And I was even doing my own mathematical equations where I would also do a chart with another 100 restaurants that I consider to be sort of in our universe, and to see where they were competitively. And I was pretty fluent with all this stuff. And they also had a category called value. So you would take, I think I did this, where I would take the average cost of a meal for every one of those restaurants, add up their food, decor, and service score, and divide it into the dollar amount to see how much bang you were getting for your buck. And I wanted to see our value score go up. I wanted to see food, decor, and service go up. But I really wanted to see us go up in the New York's favorite category. And that kept happening every year till Gramercy Tavern opened, and for the first time we dropped a notch. And that's when I knew I had completely screwed up. But I got my version of Adam Grant, a woman who was a just genius organizational development person. And she said, I'm only going to work with you if you want me to help you see what you're doing right. Because last time I checked, 3 out of 26,000 restaurants is not something to feel bad about. You should figure out what you're doing right, not what you did wrong this past year. And she was really good at helping us see what those strengths were. And we just use that for every restaurant afterwards. And it's just, that's what works.
Well, you've come to the right place for analytics.
Well, I love when you use the word evidence, because I'm intuitive, and I definitely improve when I have evidence. There's no question. I don't use evidence to lead my entrepreneurial choices, but it sure helps. Like, for example, it would be a nice segue for you to go to Shake Shack. About 7 years ago or so, or 8 years ago, I don't know when it was, Shake Shack was actually reviewed in the New York Times. They don't review fast casual restaurants, but they wanted to take on Shake Shack. So Shake Shack got 1 star, which is more stars than any other fast food restaurants, but not really what we aspire to. We want to play at the 3-star level. There said some nice things in there. There was a 1-star review in today's newspaper of a good restaurant. They're going to be fine. But the one thing that just really jabbed it into my gut was Pete Wells, the restaurant critic, said, can't one of Danny Meyer's chefs teach him how to make fresh French fries? Why are they serving these frozen things here? And it really got under my craw. So I said, we're going to show him. And at this point, I think we only had about 15 or 20 Shake Shacks in the States. We probably had about 8 internationally at that point. And I said, let's convert. Let's show them. It'll be a game changer. What if in addition to having this amazing all natural, hormone-free, antibiotic-free beef that makes our burgers and all the cage-free eggs and all the other stuff that we were very proud of doing. What if we could also say, we have fresh French fries? And everybody knows fresh is better than frozen, right? And guess what we learned? The hard way, and we were in denial for a good year and a half after converting all the shacks, because if you're going to make fresh French fries, you got to fry them 3 times, and you have to have a space to hang them between each fry. It's crazy. Come to learn that in the world of French fries, fresh is not better than frozen, and for a very good array of reasons. Number one, potatoes, like any other fruit or vegetable, have a season. So if you're using fresh potatoes year-round, that means that outside of the 1 month that they were picked, they were obviously stored somewhere. And potatoes, which have a very high sugar and or starch, convert, depending on the season or how they were stored or whatever, completely inconsistent product. And then secondly, the fresh fries didn't retain their heat. And the reason another problem is that they actually welcomed more oil, the frying oil. There's a big reason. Frozen fries are picked at peak. They're picked when they're fresh, flash frozen, so they never change their molecular structure from that point. They're actually coated with something, and the kind we use are actually coated with something very good, but there are some weird stuff on the outside of those fries. But the thing they're coated with acts like a raincoat, sealing in the heat, sealing out the oil. And at the end of the day, you can have a much more consistent, better product. Well, we were so proud and free of evidence and not listening, and just, it was the biggest lesson I think we both, Randy Garuti, my partner and longtime CEO, in how you can't just be stubborn. And if you made a mistake, you got to own up to it quickly. And so we brought back the crinkle cut fries. We found it. We said, if we're going to bring it back, we can't have all egg on our face. So we found a way to do it with non-GMO potatoes. So at least we could say, well, we brought them back better than ever. And I think that was probably the biggest one-day bump in business we ever had.
I love that you set out to learn from one of your critics and ended up proving the critic wrong. That was an unexpected twist in that story.
Well, it was such a big deal, Adam, that the day that we launched our fresh fries, we had every hourly employee at Shake Shack wearing a green T-shirt with a thing of French fries, a little drawing, and it just said "heard." I mean, we heard you, Mr. Critic. And we had to get rid of the T-shirts, too.
So disappointing. All right, I have more questions for you, but we do have a lightning round and also some audience questions I haven't gotten to yet. So let me jump around a little bit here. You ready for a lightning round?
Sure.
Okay, a word to a sentence, no more. You can skip one if you have to.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
First question, favorite Philly restaurant?
Zahav. That guy must like hummus.
Is there a food you hate or strongly dislike?
Blue cheese, hazelnuts. I'm sorry. He didn't ask you. All right. That's kind of it.
All right. What's your dream meal?
Sausage and mushroom pizza almost anywhere, but there's a place in Rome that that's my favorite. That's my last meal. Sausage and mushroom pizza. Love it.
All right, we're going to talk later about why you would ruin a pizza by putting any toppings on it. But,
okay.
All right, that's another conversation. What's a restaurant that you would recommend we all try in America that you don't own?
Zuni Cafe in San Francisco.
What about internationally?
The River Cafe in London.
Who is the chef you admire most, living?
Ruthie Rogers, who's the chef of the River Cafe in London. I think her husband just died, Richard Rogers, the great architect, who did the Pompidou Center, and it's a perfect restaurant. And she's as famous as she is. I'd say she's underrated. She's just Everything she puts on the plate needs to be there, and if it didn't need to be there, it's not on the plate. I love anyone who gets to the essence of whatever it is they're doing.
Do you have a cooking tip that might be surprising or counterintuitive to all of us?
Always bring a corkscrew. Puts you in a better mood and the food will taste better.
And what is the worst career advice you ever got?
The worst career advice I ever got. Don't ever go into that filthy business.
Okay.
That was my grandfather.
Fair enough. All right. So tell us quickly why. I want to make sure we get a few of the audience questions that we haven't covered yet. But tell us why you decided to go as somebody who was very into fine dining, and clearly that was core to your identity. Why you wanted to do burgers, fries, and shakes?
Well, I didn't. It all came down to the last question you were asking about enlightened hospitality. I had just thought about writing Setting the Table, and we're now in 2001, okay, right before 9/11 happened in New York, and I got tired of people. Every time I would say the word hospitality, they would go, "Oh, la-di-da, that's just for fancy restaurants." And so something happened. I had been on the head of the committee to restore Madison Square Park in New York City. And I knew that it would be one thing to make the park look beautiful as it had in the last century, but you also had to give people a reason to use it. So we said, let's have a public art program here. So we collaborated with the Public Art Fund of New York City, and they curated this weird piece that's one of the best things that's happened in my entire life called I Love Taxi, from a sculptor artist from Thailand named Navin Ravanshwankel. Okay, we'll come back to him in a second. And he had 4 taxi cabs, huge taxi cabs on stilts, and he designed the taxi cabs to look kind of like cartoonish on the outside, and he wanted to have a working hot dog cart to go with it, which he also designed. And so I got the knock on the door saying, would you please make the hot dogs for his hot dog cart? It's only going to be up for 2 months or 3 months. Don't worry about it. It won't be forever. And so I said, sure. And my colleagues looked at me like I was crazy. We started cooking hot dogs out of the private dining room kitchen of 11 Madison Park that would one day go on to be #1 restaurant in the world. And the reason I did it, this whole thing, I asked about the artist's vision, and the artist's vision was that everyone in the world, it was a political statement he was making, has either been able to afford to be driven in a taxi or had to be the guy driving it. And everyone else in the world could either afford to buy a hot dog or had to be the guy selling it. And so that actually lit this idea in me, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put this enlightened hospitality idea to practice with something as mundane as a hot dog cart, because I'm sick of people saying it's only for fancy restaurants. So take care of each other first. I'm going to hire all 5 of our coat checkers. Instead of waiting till the weather gets cold in October, I'm going to give you, all 5 of you, a job in July, August, September. We're going to do Chicago-style hot dogs because they have 8 classic toppings. I'm sure you guys all know what they are. And the reason I wanted to do Chicago-style hot dogs is, number one, I love them, having grown up in the Midwest. But number 2 is I wanted to see if you 5 people working here can remember, hey, that's the guy that likes everything except mustard. That's the woman that likes everything except pickle relish, right? I wanted to see if we could actually infuse a hot dog cart with hospitality. Let's see if we can take care of our community. Great, we're going to give all of our profits to the Madison Square Park Conservancy. By the way, really easy because we lost about $7,000 that year, which is why you don't have 5 people working hot dog carts generally. But so it was. Here's what happened. We had lines around the corner. This was before Twitter, before all this stuff. No one had ever seen anything like this. So 9/11 happens. The art comes down. Next summer, 2002, the community says, give us something to feel happy about. Bring back the hot dog cart. The artist had taken his art off, so now it just looks like a hot dog cart. So we did this 2002 and 2003. Finally, in 2004, I said, I want to make this thing permanent. And I just read this book by a guy named Billy Shore, who founded Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry. I had been on their board for many, many years. He wrote a book called The Cathedral Within. And the point of this book is that the great cathedrals of the world were all built by people who would not live to see them complete, because they all took forever to build. And his notion was that that's how communities get built. And he wrote about this theme called community wealth as a third rail to either government doing stuff or philanthropy doing stuff. It's basically conscious capitalism, but he didn't name it that. He called it community wealth. And I read this book and I said, that's it. I'm going to do that. I raised money. I got my mom to pitch in and maybe a couple other people. And we gifted this structure to Madison Square Park. I had some really bad names for that too. Park Paradise, Dog Run, Custard's First Stand. Finally came up with Shake Shack. And I think it probably cost us less than $1 million. We gifted it to the park, so the park would be our landlord. We would own the business. And if it worked, it would attract people to the park, keeping the park safe. It would raise money because a percentage of every sale would go right back into the park. And wouldn't that be great? I had no idea it was going to turn into a business, a public company, an international company. But that park, Madison Square Park today, in a non-COVID year, just from that one shack earns $1 million a year in rent. So it's a great business model. I'd like to figure out how to do it again somehow.
We look forward to that. All right, in the remaining 10 or so minutes that we have, let's go through a bunch of these questions, rapid fire style as well. What's your favorite item on the Shake Shack menu?
Well, I just stopped at Shake Shack on the way here, and we just introduced the white truffle burger. And I didn't feel like having a burger, but I said, I just want 2 French fries with the white truffle sauce, because they have white truffle fries now. I'll tell you what, those fries are killer. But if I go to any Shake Shack anywhere in the world, I always order the exact same thing. Plain cheeseburger. I don't get Shack sauce because I'm really trying to see. Shack sauce can make your hand taste good. I just really want to see if, because the beef can vary depending on where you are in the world. So cheeseburger, fries, and if they have it, I get a coffee shake. Not a better combination than our frozen crinkle cut fries with coffee milkshake.
All right, this one, I will confess, I don't know who the other person is, but the question is, who would win in a fight, you or Keith McNally?
Ha! Well, if it were pen to paper, he would win. So Keith, for those of you who don't know, he's a restaurateur. I don't know him, which is really weird because I've been in business long enough where I know most restaurateurs in New York. But he started Balthazar and a lot of good restaurants. He suffered a stroke a few years ago, and I think he moved to London, but he's very, very acerbic. You should check out his Instagram site sometime. He's got a lot of stuff to say. Presumably, the person who wrote this is wondering because Keith famously kicked out of his restaurant a pretty famous actor or something like that, and got the actor to grovel back on his knees to get a reservation there. And then on another one of his Instagram posts, he started musing, this was sometime this past year, about how he's been thinking about how he would really like to have sex in a restaurant bathroom. And come to think of it, if he ever were to do it, he would either want to do it in one of Danielle Boulud's restaurants or one of Danny Meyer's restaurants. So I thought for about 10 minutes about answering on Instagram and saying, we will update your profile notes. But I think wisdom got the better of me, and I just sat it out. But maybe whoever asked the question, you must have known one of those 2 stories.
I will not be going to his Instagram. Thank you. Okay, next question. What's the most important question to ask yourself when you're considering taking a big risk?
How will I handle things when they go right? I think that's it's part of the curse and blessing of being an entrepreneur is that I feel like if I had an eye problem, it wouldn't be nearsighted or farsighted, it would be upsighted. Because I'm not an evidence-based person, I see what can work all the time. And I think it's even more important to try to ask yourself, what if this works? How will that impact things? Because it's pretty easy to say if it doesn't work, what will we do?
What was your biggest lesson from COVID?
Such a good question. The biggest lesson was that to the degree that I thought that I was a good communicator with our team, I had to up that game by 1,000% because we were distant from one another because we had to be. And everyone on our team, shouldn't say everyone, but most people who self-select into our industry thrive on being with people. And the fear, the lack of information, the distance, the fact that everyone was using Zoom, and it was just, I remember scrolling through pages with hundreds of people on there, but we just over-communicated because we had to.
Okay, two final questions. One is, you were pretty anti-tipping for a long time. Seems like you've changed your mind and rethought that stance. What happened?
Seemed like a good idea at the time. It was an important philosophical choice that I made, and I stand by the philosophical choice, which is that every year since I've been in the restaurant business, the disparity between what tipped employees can make and what non-tip eligible employees can make, and in New York State, for example, you may not share in the tip pool unless you spend 80% of your time in a guest-facing role, which is a ridiculous law because who's measuring it? But in other words, cooks are primarily not allowed to share in the tip pool. So every year, waiters happily are making more money because a tip is nothing more than a multiplier of always increasing menu prices. And meanwhile, the hourly compensation for cooks stayed pretty, didn't get that much bigger because every time you give a cook a raise, you keep raising your menu price and the disparity just grows wider. So I said, I'm so tired of this. It just doesn't feel good. And it also doesn't feel good on a crazy busy Saturday night. And I'm happy to see the waiters counting their money in the back, but the cook just sweated more. That's not fair. So I decided, enough. I don't have to be a tipping house. So I came up with this idea called Hospitality Included. 2015, we rolled it out one restaurant at a time every 4 months or so. And it was really, really hard, Adam, because the math, the guests came along. They actually liked it. There were a couple guests early on who said, how am I going to grease the palm and get my favorite table? I said, I don't want that happening in my restaurants anyway. We love you, so we'll give you a good table. You don't have to do that. But, and our people are actually being nice to you because they like being nice to you, not because they're doing it in expectation of a higher reward at the end of the night. The math was really hard because if we were going to pay our servers enough so they were not taking a pay cut when we eliminated tipping, pay our cooks 20% more, which was our goal, pay our starting managers 20% more, because a big problem with the tipping world is that if you're making good tips, you have a dead-end job because you cannot afford to become a manager without taking a 25% pay cut. How weird is it that the person you work for makes 25% less than you do? So I wanted to correct that. I wanted to have a very, very healthy family leave policy for both the birth mother and the birth father. I wanted to do all this stuff. And I didn't want to have to raise our prices too much because people go to the internet and all of a sudden your $28 chicken is $38. And it's really hard on the internet to say, but wait a second, that includes everything, right? So we did this experiment right through the summer of 2020, which was the summer of COVID when we were first, so five and a half years we put into this. And we were first able to serve outdoor. That was the first time. We had no revenue for the first 6, 7 months. And New Yorkers were just throwing money at our servers. Like, they were so happy that these people were coming out. We didn't have the vaccine yet, putting themselves on the front line so we could have a restaurant meal. And it just, at a certain point, it felt inhumane for me. How can I say I'm on the side of our staff when I say you're not allowed to accept someone's gratitude? And furthermore, you must tell the guests that they're not allowed to say thank you. So we came up with a new way of doing it. I reinstituted tipping. I came up philosophically with the explanation to myself that tipping isn't the problem. It's the inability to have tips shared that's the problem. And you can share tips in at least 15 states in the country legally. There's no reason that should not be the case everywhere. That's what the problem is. And so what we did when we reinstated tipping was that we instated a new program of our own where we pay a percentage of our sales every night to the non-tip eligible employees. So I don't think we should have to do that. I think if tips can be shared, then we shouldn't have to do that. But this way we didn't have to eliminate all the gains we had made.
Such a powerful example of rethinking your practices but staying true to your principles. Okay, last question. You introduced me a long time ago to one of my all-time favorite interview questions that I ask all the time now. And the question, as I remember it, is, what's the biggest misperception that other people have of you? So let me actually turn this into 2 questions. Number 1, what is the biggest misperception that other people have of you, Danny?
Thanks a lot.
Because we have to turn the tables after table has been set. And then secondly, why do you love this question?
I'll answer the first part first. I think the biggest misperception people think about me is that Mr. Hospitality is not incredibly competitive. I love winning, and I think that hospitality is a perfectly fine competitive trait.
It's even part of your competitive advantage, some would argue.
I would argue that, but I think, my least favorite expression in the world is "nice guys finish last." I think it's the stupidest thing on earth. So I think there's that misperception. I asked the question because you get a good sense right off the bat of someone's self-awareness, because you cannot answer that question if you're not only self-aware, but also other-aware. And there's a lot of people who go through life like a speedboat that's completely unaware of the wake it's leaving in its path. And I want to hire people who know how they make other people feel, but also know what makes them tick. So I love that question.
I do too.
I'll give you another one sometime, as long as you never ask me. But I'm not going to do it now.
All right, I'll look forward to that one later. Danny, thank you for coming down to hang out with us today. Let me just say, you obviously make our food better, but more than that, I think you challenge us all to be better human beings, and for that, I am deeply grateful. Thank you.
Adam, thank you.
Thank you.
You guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.